The stepbrother who treated me like a sister tore off his gentle facade after misunderstanding a kiss between me and someone else. He forcefully pressed me against the door. "Do you feel grown up now?" I met his stare without hesitation. "Yes." His eyes darkened as he threw aside his frameless glasses and used his tie to stifle my voice. That night, he leaned in close to my ear and corrected me. "This is what growing up means, little sister." Mark rarely got drunk. Facing this side of him made me feel unfamiliar. "Brother, are you feeling a bit dizzy?" I glanced at the scenery outside the car window and estimated the time to reach home. "Yeah." He closed his eyes, leaning back in the back seat with a hint of weariness in his voice. The driver focused on the road. I slowly moved closer. "Can I massage your forehead for you?" Mark opened his eyes and our gazes met. Perhaps due to the dim lighting inside the car, I saw a different emotion in his eyes. He didn't speak. Taking his silence as consent, I knelt on the seat to help massage his temples. The serene atmosphere was shattered by a sudden sharp break. My balance instantly faltered, and as I was about to fall, Mark wrapped his arms around me, holding me close. While soothing my head, he looked at the driver in the rearview mirror. "Apologizing, sir, a dog suddenly darted out earlier." Mark then looked at me, asking softly, "Did you hit anything?" As I was about to shake my head, I moved my leg and lifted my head from his embrace. "My knee hurts from knocking into something." He glanced at it and then turned his gaze to the driver. "Keep driving." The car resumed its normal speed, but Mark didn't let me go, letting me sit sideways on his lap. His hand rested on my knee, applying gentle pressure. Although there was no injury, I wasn't entirely lying, it did hurt a bit. Mark's tipsiness seemed to be taking over. I could hear his slightly uneven breathing. The atmosphere gradually became warmer. I pursed my lips and took the initiative to slide off his lap. "It's okay, brother." He looked at me for a moment before removing his hand from my knee. However, he held onto my hand instead. I turned my head to look at him. He just gazed at me with his eyes, playing with my hand. Mark's unfamiliar behavior at home made me realize something new about him. As soon as I opened the door, he pushed me against it without a word. Despite his silence, I sensed his breath getting closer. I suddenly remembered his recent rumored girlfriend, a female celebrity under his company. To prevent any misunderstanding, I cleared my throat. "Brother, please look carefully. I'm not your rumored girlfriend, I'm Karina." When Mark was drunk, he seemed like a different person. Ever since he sensed my crush on him in high school and indirectly rejected me, we hadn't been this intimate. He made a noise of acknowledgement. Then he leaned closer, brushing his nose against mine. "Karina. I didn't mistake you." Perhaps it was the faint smell of alcohol in the air, but my courage surged. I leaned against his collarbone, and my hand involuntarily relaxed, allowing the man to get closer. His gaze shifted from my eyes to my lips. As we were about 1 centimeter apart, my phone rang suddenly. Startled, I pushed Mark away. "Brother, I should go rest." Distractedly looking around, I avoided making eye contact with him. After saying those words, I awkwardly rushed back to my room, nestling under the covers, with my slightly flushed face, pondering. Did Mark perhaps start to like me a little too? With 1 month left in my sophomore summer break, I remembered I still didn't know how to swim. So, I hired a private coach recommended online to come to my house and teach me in the pool. Initially, everything was fine, until one day. Mark was still at work, leaving me alone in the villa with the coach who had ulterior motives. "You're not doing it right, little girl. I've taught you so many times. And you still can't get it," he said, before jumping into the water and sneaking up behind me. His proximity was uncomfortable, and I furrowed my eyebrows slightly. "I can manage on my own." As I tried to push him away, I felt the strap of my swimsuit being pulled off. The loose swimsuit made me cover up instantly, retreating without a sound. "What do you think you're doing?" His gaze grew clouded, and he smirked. Just as he was about to approach me, the door was pushed open by Mark. He walked straight towards me, his expression unreadable. "Mr. Mark." The coach, caught off guard by his unexpected return, stuttered incoherently and quickly distanced himself from me. Mark, unmoved, grabbed a towel and approached the pool. I, on the other hand, paddled over to him nervously. Mark wrapped the towel around me and lifted me out of the pool, holding me close. Brother. Overwhelmed with relief, I held onto Mark tightly. He halted his steps. Did he touch you? I immediately shook my head before he had the chance to. Mark gently patted my head before carrying me upstairs. Passing by the bodyguard, he nodded towards the pool area. Keep an eye on him. I gripped his shoulder, glancing back at the coach. After Mark placed me in the bedroom, I couldn't help but ask, Brother, are you going to punish him? His action of unclasping his watch slowed down, and he looked down at me. You don't want me to? I hesitated, pulling the covers over me, my confidence waning. No. I just hadn't seen Mark in a situation where he had to resort to violence. From the bedroom window, I could see the pool scene vividly. Mark had removed his suit jacket, rolling up his shirt sleeves. Mr. Mark, I'm sorry for my mistake. The coach watched as Mark approached him, continually backing away. Mark gave a meaningless smile. So, I'm here to wake you up, right? With that said, he pressed down on the coach's neck, forcing him to his knees by the pool's edge. The coach struggled, but Mark remained unwavering. He forcefully dunked the coach's head into the water. Bubbles rose in the corner of the pool, splashing water into the air. As the struggling faded, Mark pulled him out and tossed him to the pool's edge, nonchalantly stepping on the coach's hand. Was it this hand that touched her? The man couldn't speak clearly from being choked with water. Mark chuckled and pressed down on his other hand. Was it this one? As the coach was barely conscious, Mark finally released him, throwing him to the bodyguard. Take him away. I gazed out of the window, not paying much attention to the coach's harsh consequences. Instead, I was watching Mark. Cupping my chin, I thought foolishly, my brother is so handsome. Although the coach displayed dangerous behavior, I was determined to learn how to swim. When I mentioned this desire to Mark, he casually tapped his fingers on the table and softly said, Then, I'll teach you. I didn't think much at that time and simply responded with a soft "oh." But when we actually got into the water that night, I began to sense something amiss. With the minimal fabric, our bodies nearly had unrestricted contact. Karina, how long can you hold your breath? I bobbed in the water, unsure. Mark pulled me in front of him. Let's test your breath holding first. As I submerged, trying to hold on a little longer, I unexpectedly choked on water. Karina? Mark quickly pulled me up. I coughed a couple of times, realizing I was almost pressed against Mark's body. Are you okay? His hand patted my back lightly. I stared blankly at him, unable to react. Mark also seemed taken aback, his hand pausing on my back. In the moment of silence, our eyes met, and he didn't release his grip. Brother. I swallowed hard, feeling the air grow warmer. I shifted my gaze to his slightly flushed Adam's apple. My hand touched it almost involuntarily, softly asking, Are you nervous too, brother? That night, he didn't answer me. He simply tightened his hold on my hand. I didn't press further for an answer, but in the silent exchange, I sensed a rush of affection between us. Finally, when I gathered the courage to actually ask Mark, news of his rumored affair with the female star resurfaced while he was on a business trip. The day Mark returned, I went out to drown my sorrows in alcohol. In reality, I had barely drunk half a bottle of nearly non-alcoholic fruit wine. My roommate had a tomboyish appearance. So, when she brought me back, Mark standing on the stairs mistook her for a guy. Karina, stop fooling around. You're home, go back inside. It took a lot of effort, but I eventually made it back to the house. Where did you go? Mark stood in the dark, his voice heavy as he approached. I avoided switching on the lights, feeling somewhat defiant as I replied, Out with friends. Out with male friends at this hour? Mark put down his whiskey glass and walked towards me. What were you doing downstairs? I didn't answer and was about to head upstairs when he grabbed my wrist. His tone was restrained. I'm asking you a question. What were you doing with him? It doesn't concern you, and you're not my real brother. I tried to break free, but he pressed me against the wall. Karina, he gripped my chin, forcing me to meet his gaze. Do you feel grown up now? The sporadic traces of alcohol gave me a falsely inflated courage. I met his gaze. Yes. His gaze intensified as he towered over me. Suddenly, a chilling smile tugged at his lips. The kiss descended without warning. I patted his shoulder, but he firmly held my hand against the wall. As my mind spun in confusion and I stopped struggling, Mark prompting me again with a smirk and a gentle tug. As the kiss ended, I was still trying to process it when Mark pulled back, gazing down at me. "Karina, can you help me take off my glasses?" Curled up in his embrace, I blankly raised my hand to follow his instructions. Exiting this layer of lenses made his desire more apparent in his eyes. He seemingly took it as a reward and kissed me once more before carrying me to the bedroom. "Brother, what are you planning to do?" I was nervous. Mark reassured me gently, "I'll teach you another kind of growing up." In the quiet night, I heard the rapid beating of my own heart. After replaying everything that hadn't happened yet in my mind, I was placed in bed by Mark. Before the 4th grade of elementary school, I would occasionally sneak into Mark's room holding a pillow because I was afraid of the dark. Years later, the scene replayed itself. Mark propped himself up on one elbow next to my ear, sitting on the edge of the bed watching me. Hey. He lazily rubbed my earlobe. "Want to say something?" I tried to follow his gaze in the dim moonlight. "I like you." Just as I was about to bury the secret crush forever in my heart, Mark took a step closer to me, giving me the courage once again. His eyes filled with a smile as he leaned in to kiss me. I knew. As I nervously listened to the sound of water in the bathroom, I felt tense. It wasn't until the blanket next to me was lifted and someone climbed in. The air was silent for 5 minutes. Hey. I peered out from under the covers to look at him. Mark closed his eyes and hugged me, kissing the top of my head. "Some things need to wait until after you and your uncle publicly announce it." The day after Mark said this, my aunt suddenly showed up at our door with my cousin. Mark was adopted by my mother. But after my mother passed away 6 years ago, my only blood relative was my uncle's family. In the evening, Mark came back. My aunt got up to greet him. "Mark, you've been busy all day. You should focus on starting a family. Do you have a girlfriend you're dating?" Mark handed his coat to the housekeeper, looking at me. I frantically shook my head, signaling to him. "Yes." I instantly became nervous. Fortunately, my aunt didn't ask any further questions. Just nodding approvingly. I followed Mark upstairs to his study. Mark was sitting in his swivel chair, looking at me with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I need an explanation," he said. "Just." I hesitated as I approached him. "Aunt seems to already treat you like a nephew. It might scare her if you tell her now." He tapped my chin with his finger, not saying a word. I wrapped my arms around his neck, giving him a kiss. "Don't be upset, Mark." He paused, looking up at me through his glasses. "What did you call me?" I tilted my head and blinked. "Can't I call you that?" Mark lifted me onto his lap. "You can do whatever you want." The ambiguous atmosphere spread, and the kiss naturally deepened. He preferred to see me take the initiative rather than being passive. At first, our kisses lingered on the lips and didn't deepen. But when I couldn't hold my breath any longer, I opened my mouth. Mark immediately deepened the kiss. "Sis." A childish voice made me instantly sober, pushing Mark away. My 5-year-old cousin, who had somehow opened the study door, stood innocently in the doorway. "Are you kissing your brother?" My heart skipped a beat as I anxiously walked over to him, crouching down. "Ah, you saw it wrong." The man behind me let out a low chuckle, making my unconvincing lie sound like a joke. "You didn't see it wrong." My cousin corrected me seriously. "I also saw brother leaning in." "You did see it wrong." I quickly interrupted him. "Let's go. I'll take you to buy some snacks. Don't tell Mom, okay?" I held his small hand, leading him out, and glanced back at Mark before leaving. He was casually leaning back in his chair, gazing at me intently. It took a hefty feat to silence my cousin completely. So, during my aunt's short stay, I went back to the days before our confession with Mark. "Karina, come to the study." Mark stood at the top of the stairs, calling me in front of everyone. I shook my head firmly. "No, there's no need, Mark. If you have something to say, just say it." Mark silently stared at me for 2 seconds, making me feel uneasy before finally leaving. That night, Mark did something unusual. He didn't work. Instead, he sat with me, my aunt, and my cousin on the couch watching TV. Suddenly, the room went black. "What's going on?" my aunt asked. "It's probably a power outage. I've already turned on the backup generator. Maybe it was due to the moon not being visible that night, but the room was pitch black." As soon as Mark spoke, I felt a hand grab me. The next moment, I was lifted and sat on someone's lap. It was Mark. I almost gasped in surprise. My aunt and cousin were sitting on the nearby lounge sofa. "What are you doing?" I asked in a low voice, leaning in close to his ear. His hand rested on my waist as his lips approached, softly caressing while whispering. "Just a few minutes, what can I do?" The next moment, he silenced me with another kiss. I was too nervous to make a sound. Just then, my cousin suddenly spoke up. "Mom, I want to play a game. Give me your phone." I tensed up, lightly patting his shoulder. Mark showed no signs of letting go. On the contrary, his other hand slowly moved up, pressing against the back of my neck to meet his advances. "Your phone is charging in the house. Wait for a call before going to get it, and don't drop it." As my aunt's voice faded, I breathed a sigh of relief. Mark finally let go half a minute before the call came. I sat back on the sofa. The living room lit up again, and Mark stood up calmly. "I still have some work to finish, so I won't keep you company any longer." He stared at me quizzically before walking away. I reasonably suspected that the blackout was deliberate. After my aunt and cousin left, they didn't come back for a long time. Another semester was coming to an end, and the pressure of finals made me increasingly anxious. Peter from the English department had suddenly started to pursue me relentlessly after breaking up with his 7th girlfriend this semester. On that occasion, Mark came to pick me up at the school gate and happened to see the scene. Peter stood in front of me, holding a handful of hair gel, and said something in English. It probably meant, "Sweetie, can you agree today to the boy who thinks about you to the point of losing sleep?" My mind seemed fogged, and I didn't respond immediately. After a few seconds, I irritatedly spoke up. "You have already harassed me. Do you know that I can call the police?" Peter stepped back sullenly. "I was just expressing my affection. There's no need for this, sweetie." I took a deep breath and walked past him. As I got into the car, Mark's gaze lingered on Peter. "Should I take care of him for you?" He tapped his fingers lightly on the steering wheel, his tone unreadable. I shook my head. "No need, brother. He probably won't bother me again." But the reality proved that Peter did not take my warning to heart. That day at the library, after completing a set of practice questions, I found myself 15 minutes over time. I sighed, about to open a video to relax. Just as I lit up my phone, a news story popped up. Breaking news! Popular actress dating Booth Group CEO. It was the same actress from before. In the photo, she was hugging Mark around the neck at a hotel entrance, looking like she was being coquettish. In an instant, exhaustion felt like a wave crashing over my head. Suffocation washed over me. This was the second time she had used Mark for publicity. If Mark had warned her before, would there really be a second time? I opened Mark's conversation, but I couldn't type a single word. I didn't even have the energy to ask questions. That evening, my roommate suggested going to a nearby bar to unwind. I hesitated, but decided not to refuse. Unfortunately, I ran into Peter and his group. He stared at me for a while before leisurely leaving his seat. Under Peter's forced ambiguities, I became increasingly uncomfortable. Just as I was about to leave, Peter came over with 2 drinks. "Here. Have a drink." I put ice in it. "Can you handle cold drinks today?" His probing was obvious. I refused and handed it back. "No need." He pushed it back into my hand, insisting, "Have a drink." This time, before I could say anything, 2 men appeared behind Peter. They put their hands on his shoulders. "You're looking for trouble, kid?" They promptly escorted Peter out of the bar. I recognized the 2 men as Mark's bodyguards. I grabbed my coat and hurried after them, but they had disappeared by the time I got outside. Upon arriving home, Mark was sitting on the couch waiting for me. "I had the car pick you up. Why did you come back alone?" I cut him off. "Mark." I interrupted him. "Are you surveilling me?" His gaze shifted from the tablet, meeting my eyes. In an instant, I felt the atmosphere turn cold. "Then why did your people show up immediately and take Peter away? Didn't I say I could handle it? Instead of dealing with your own affairs, you're constantly having people track my every move." Emotions erupted strangely within me. The recent jumble of events had caused overwhelming frustration at this moment. "Can't you see what you've become?" The words slipped out, a blade that pierced Mark's heart. In the past, I would have never thought in this direction. Later, I realized too late. I had spoiled Mark, found a way to vent my anger, and recklessly unleashed all my fury on him unrelatedly. As soon as I said those words, I regretted them. But the damage from my words had already been done. "Brother." Mark suddenly smiled, looking at me steadily. "All these years, I thought you already knew who I was. Did you never think about this before being with me?" He didn't bother to defend himself, tossing his tablet aside in disgust, standing up, grabbing his coat, then walking past me out the door. Not even a glance back. I felt like my soul had been ripped away, slumped dully on the couch, and slept the night away. Mark didn't return all night. When I woke up in the morning, I found out from his assistant, who had come to help him get documents, that he was probably already on a flight to Edinburgh. The assistant stopped in the hallway and looked at me with a puzzled expression before speaking. When I came to pick up the boss yesterday, I overheard everything. He wasn't monitoring you, he was just worried about that guy named Peter, afraid that he might have ill intentions towards you, so he had someone keep an eye on him. And the reason the bodyguard intervened last night was because Peter spiked the drink he gave you. I listened in silence, head bowed, clutching the edge of my skirt tightly. Time hadn't eroded my guilt, it had only grown stronger. Mark wasn't intentionally keeping things from me. He just felt that I had already made up my mind about him, so there was no point in explaining. A tear fell on the back of my hand. Regret felt too light for me now. The assistant was about to leave when his phone rang. His expression changed suddenly. I looked up, feeling a sense of foreboding. The assistant looked at me gravely without blinking. After a moment, he spoke softly. The boss's flight crashed. It felt like I had been in a long dream. In the dream, it was the first year after my mom passed away, and we had no source of income. Mark, who had just started college, not only had to earn his own tuition but also support our living expenses. Even in the toughest times, he never let me feel any hardship. Beautiful dresses, the best stationery, he always provided them for me. Brother, I whispered in the dream, tears streaming down my face. And then I cried myself awake. After hearing the news of the plane crash, I fainted and developed a high fever. Karina, a familiar voice. My thoughts slowly gathered, and I looked at the man sitting by the bed. It was Mark. Are you feeling uncomfortable? He placed his hand on my forehead. I blinked, confirming that this was real. I cried and hugged Mark tightly, apologizing repeatedly. I'm sorry, brother, I'm so sorry, I shouldn't have said those things. Mark rubbed my head. Don't cry, your fever hasn't gone down yet. The incident of the plane crash was just a misunderstanding. Mark had found out that the collaboration partner had already arrived in the country from Edinburgh, so he cancelled his trip. I raised my head from his shoulder and kissed his cheek, realizing my mistake. I love you, Mark said as we shared a passionate kiss. Later, I decided to address my concerns about his rumored relationship with a female celebrity. As Mark flipped through reports, he calmly said, "You won't see any news about her in the entertainment media anymore." I was taken aback. Did you ban her? Mark raised an eyebrow. I don't have the right to strip someone of their acting opportunities, he said in an official tone. He explained that after warning the female celebrity about the rumors once before, she did not take it seriously. This time, when she tried to cozy up to Mark at a hotel, he immediately sued her for defamation and infringement of his image rights, seeking a hefty compensation. The celebrity's company, upon hearing of this, terminated her contract. I wondered, was this really different from effectively banning her? The challenging semester ended smoothly. Due to internship requirements, I had to intern at Mark's company during the winter break. Nobody knew about our relationship. One day during lunch break, Mark messaged me. There's no one on this floor right now, come up to my office to rest while I'm in a meeting. Exhausted from the intensive work in the past days, I discreetly glanced around and took the elevator to the top floor. I had hardly been to Mark's office before. Just as I entered, admiring the decor, the noise of footsteps outside distracted me. Without thinking, I hid under the closest desk. The door opened. Mark sat down, but didn't notice my presence. I tugged at his pant leg. Startled. He met my eyes and chuckled, raising an eyebrow. Mark? The person at the door reminded him. I mouthed to him, "Quick, get him out." Mark understood, but did not react. He adjusted his chair slightly lower and held my hand underneath the table where the visitor couldn't see. I glanced at Mark defiantly, but he remained unfazed. He dragged his chair closer and held my legs. "What are you messing with?" He scolded as he discovered my presence. "Because my legs are falling asleep, and you wouldn't let him leave," I retorted boldly. I was wearing a short skirt, which Mark's gaze lingered on. Asleep? Unaware of his deepened voice, I nodded. The next moment, his hand was on my leg. Want me to massage it? Mark didn't give me time to consider. He lifted me onto his desk, shoes slipping off and landing on his knee. "Bro, my legs aren't that asleep," I protested. The position was too awkward. As I tried to slide off, Mark held my waist in place. "Don't move, let me see where it is numbed." He locked eyes with me, holding my ankle and slowly tracing upwards. "Karina, Do you know what I'm going to do? His tone was gentle, but out of place with the tense atmosphere. When I felt the danger in the air, Mark's hand had already stopped me from backing away. Leo, he raised his head, informing shortly. Leave the proposal here, and you can go out. Confused, Leo left and closed the door behind him, and Mark then lifted me up. What are you fidgeting with? Mark smacked my lower back as a punishment. I accused him, because my leg was falling asleep, and you kept him here. My short skirt only intensified the tension. Mark's gaze on my legs made me feel exposed. Tired? He asked softly, as if it were a casual question. Supporting myself on the desk, I looked down, confused and lost. Not scared, Karina. Mark smiled and made the decision for both of us. But he wasn't satisfied yet. He loosened his tie with one hand. The office isn't soundproof. Do you want others to hear? I immediately shook my head. Mark smirked, satisfied, and gestured for me to bite the tie knot. Don't spit it out, understand? He warned, then gently rubbed my face and lifted my hand, interlocking our fingers. In that moment, I felt Mark's true intention was to control my emotions rather than his own desires. Confessing to my uncle and aunt was a rocky process. Mark took me to their house voluntarily. I grabbed Mark's hand and was about to share the sketch I had been sketching all day in my mind. But before I could speak, my aunt intercepted us, saying, Karina, how old are you? You still need your brother to hold your hand? She separated our hands and pushed us into the living room. My aunt's teasing smile faded as she laid eyes on us. Clearly, she had seen something that suggested otherwise. The tension in the room escalated. Standing with hands on her hips, she finally spoke. You two, she pointed at the two of us, then her finger finally pointed towards me. It's you, Karina. You've always liked everything pretty since you were a child, whether it's people or things. Did you approach Mark because you found him good-looking? I was a little confused by this line of thought, but I admitted that I did approach him. Mark spoke up before I could. It was me who made the first move. Don't blame Karina. My aunt glared at Mark for a while, then sighed deeply. All right, you two are more like childhood sweethearts than siblings, so it's understandable. Although my aunt still had some complaints towards us, she at least allowed us to sit down and have a meal. Just when the atmosphere was starting to relax a bit, my bewitched little cousin suddenly spoke up. Sister, will you take me to buy Ultraman later? My aunt patted him on the back of his head. Your sister is a student, how can she afford to buy you this and that? My little cousin pouted and stared at my aunt. If sister doesn't take me, I'll tell others about you and brother's secret. That was when my aunt realized that when she came to my house last time, I was already together with Mark. The temperature around my aunt dropped to freezing point. She refused to serve me any dishes. Even when we finished eating and left, she didn't say a word to us. It was a stark contrast to her previous attitude. She was genuinely angry. On the way back, I kept thinking about how to appease my aunt and didn't realize that the car wasn't heading home. It wasn't until we stopped. Where are we? I stared around in confusion. A hot spring villa. Mark had booked a private hot spring in advance. As soon as I entered the room, my attention was drawn to the temperature of the hot spring pool. I took a sniff and felt something odd. I turned to call Mark. He was busy selecting colorful boxes on the shelf. You should soak first, I'll pick something for you. I closed my eyes, ignoring his inexplicable desire to pick something. The scent of this pool was strange. Mark flicked his finger, studying the pattern on the box. It's the smell of eucalyptus leaves. That was the first time I had heard of such a thing. Without much thought, I entered the pool. After a while, Mark also walked in holding something. I stayed in a corner. Hey, can you let me soak alone for a while quietly, bro? Mark took off his glasses and placed them on a wooden board nearby. You can soak by yourself later. I stayed put, pretending not to hear. Mark smiled, speaking gently. Then I'll come over. There was a difference between him coming over and me going to him voluntarily. The biggest difference was Mark's attitude. To survive, I moved reluctantly. It took me a while to reach Mark. He didn't move, just looked at me quietly. Don't want to? I shook my head, feeling a bit uncomfortable. Mark scanned my entire body, finally fixing his gaze on my neck. What's this? He raised a smile, touching a small patch of red rash at my neck. I also reached up to touch it, then shook my head. And soon after, rashes started appearing on my neck and chin. Karina, are you allergic to eucalyptus leaves? I didn't know, maybe. I said while wanting to scratch. Mark held my hand, pulling me out of the hot spring. He quickly helped me put on my clothes and rushed to the hospital. It was indeed an allergy to eucalyptus leaves. Mark got some medication and applied it in the hospital. When we left the hospital, it was already past midnight. Mark must have planned tonight for a long time. Should we go back to the hot spring? Mark tightened the scarf around my neck. You're not suitable for soaking now. I'll take you next time. We drove straight back home. Mark didn't say much on the way. Instead of heading to the house, he drove the car into the yard. As the car stopped, I looked at the seatbelt wrapped around my waist and spoke softly. Are you feeling upset, bro? Mark hesitated, but didn't say anything. He unbuckled his seatbelt and got out of the car. He opened the passenger door and hugged me in his arms. Sorry for letting you sense my bad emotions. It's not that I'm upset. He lowered his head and kissed the tip of my nose. It's guilt. I felt guilty for not noticing right away that you weren't feeling well, whether as a brother or a boyfriend. I was irresponsible. I played with the hem of his coat and looked up at him. I replayed the whole process from when we got together until now in my mind. As both of us were experiencing our first love, there were inevitably some areas where we were hesitant, some wrong paths we took. Bro, let's not blame ourselves anymore. We still have a long future to work things out. Mark whispered, okay, and took my hand, getting off the car. It felt like a scene from a drama. Suddenly, it started snowing, the first snow of the year. I stopped, smiled as I looked at the falling snow. Bro, let's watch the snow for a while. Mark agreed to my decision and stayed with me. The first time I met Mark was also on a snowy day. Mom brought me in front of a boy and said, Karina, this is Mark. And from now on, we are a family. Later, I learned the reason why my mom adopted 14-year-old Mark. She was a police officer. During a mission, a suspect resisted arrest with a knife. My mom got injured in a scuffle. It was Mark, who happened to be coming back from school at that time, picked up a broken bottle and hit the suspect, helping my mom get out of danger and successfully arresting the suspect. Mom found out that Mark was a child from an orphanage. At 14, no one would want to adopt him anymore. But my mother still brought him back home. From then on, Mark entered my life and became an inseparable part. Bro. I shook his hand. Let's go to Switzerland next year for the first snow. Okay. For the year after next, I want to go to Milan. All right, I'll take you. In the distant future. My voice gradually dissipated in the air with the falling snowflakes. But Mark won't, and I won't. We will still be looking forward to every future first snow. Because we have many years ahead of us.